Okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Beautiful Black Books. My name is Mighty Mike McGee. I am the interim secretary for the board of directors for Poetry Center San Jose, and a fellow poet myself. Today, Beautiful Black Books features a guest, Remica Bingham-Risher, reading and in conversation with Santa Clara County Poet Laureate Emeritus Tshaka Campbell. Today is Saturday, June 29th, 2024. Beautiful Black Books is a recurring program featuring Black writers in conversation, followed by a Q&A. It is a vessel of exchange as we bring Black writers to our communities and our communities to these writers to learn about their sources of inspiration. I would also like to begin this session with our with a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that Poetry Center San Jose and the city of San Jose exist on the unceded land of the Muwekma Ohlone. We recognize that the Muwekma Ohlone people are alive and flourishing members of the community today and recognize their right to this land, which they have stewarded throughout generations. We acknowledge that members of the San Jose community and residents of California and the United States continue to benefit from the use and occupation of indigenous land. We acknowledge that this land has come under the control of various entities through violence and dishonesty, and we recognize the history and legacy of colonialism that continue to negatively impact indigenous peoples, their traditional territories, practices, sovereignty, languages, lifeways, and well-being to this day. Now, without any further ado, I would also like to just say a few words about Poetry Center San Jose. It is our mission to nurture and promote diverse literary expression in our community as a means of exploring, defining, and enriching the human experience. In furtherance of our mission, we offer programs and services to stimulate passion for the literary arts and to inspire and support emerging and established writers. We collaborate with other organizations to ensure that these programs and services reflect the diversity of our community and to involve people from a wide range of backgrounds as audience and members. We have a wide range of events and programs that we produce locally and nationally through Zoom and other streaming services. And it is with great pleasure that I bring to you today Beautiful Black Books. Tshaka Campbell, take it away, my friend.
Well, thank you so much, Mike, for that wonderful introduction. I was kind of like, double Dutch the whole time you're going. I'm kind of like, I want to get in. I want to get in. So, and I say that because I am super excited about our guest today. And just before I get into that, just to reiterate what Mike said, the reason one of the reasons we put together Beautiful Black Books is because we really want to see this as a vessel of exchange. We want to bring Black writers to our communities and our communities to these writers to learn about sort of what's behind the scenes, who are these individuals, and so this is sort of the permission to do so. But today we have the wonderful Remica Bingham-Risher. I've been looking forward to this for some time. How are you doing this fine, what is it, afternoon for you?
Yes, afternoon leaning into evening. It's hot here. I'm doing great. If you call me the wonderful, well then obviously I'm doing well.
Was what I'm saying.
I'm doing well. I appreciate you. but doing well here. Holed up in my office, just in the AC. So that's a real gift to me.
There it is. There it is. So look, I've heard so much about you, to the point where I've been sent messages to say, who you need to put on your show, right? So
I love people so much, and no, I mean people didn't hit me to the game, so I'm so grateful.
No, they are. The world, the universe works how the universe is supposed to work.
That's right.
What I mean? And so folks were sort of like, hey, nudge, nudge.
Yeah.
So I'm appreciative to them as well. But let's jump in right first. Where are you talking to us from today? Where are you hailing from?
So I said I was in my office, but I'm in my office, like where I work. You can see all my books behind me, the piles and piles, and then some that are actually shelved as they should be. I'm working on summer is when I really work on my projects, but I'm in Norfolk, Virginia. So we're right along the coast. I'm at Old Dominion University, where I'm an administrator here. I help faculty integrate reading and writing into the classroom. And I'm a poet a little bit too, in other capacities on campus. Right, right. But that's not what they hired me for. They pay me to do other things. I just, continue to be a poet because that's what we do.
Exactly.
And so yeah, so I'm here on Saturday on in a very quiet, lovely campus. It's wonderful when nobody's.
That's wonderful. Norfolk, I was a stone's, I don't know if it's a stone's throw away, but I went to Hampton.
Oh, yes, the real HU. Don't listen.
Look, I didn't want to say it.
I was about to say, don't get me in trouble. I'll ride for my Hampton people now. If I'm a little closer to DC, I won't get no rock stone in me, so I won't play around. But yeah, so HU is up the street, 20, 25 minutes away from us. And NSU, another wonderful HBCU that I was, that I taught at for 7 years, is right up the street from us too. We're a college/military town. Most people know Norfolk because we have the biggest naval base in the world.
Right.
So we got all kinds of different folks in the area, which is nice.
That's good. That is fantastic. How does well, no, I'm not even gonna go there first. First, I'm gonna go. This is one of the questions I love talking about just in the beginning. I love my Marvel and my comic books. And so
Lord, I should have brought my husband and my kids.
Always an origin story. What's your origin story? What got you into poetry? Become a writer.
Oh, that's a good question. I was a teacher, of course, a wonderful teacher, my fifth grade teacher. Darlene Myers brought us in a Langston Hughes poem, Mother's Son. Which is if it's a poem most of us know, that we kind of hear early on, but it's a persona poem, so it's in the voice of like a grandmother. Well, son, I'll tell you, life for me ain't been no crystal stair. It's had boards in it, right? And so it was a poem that immediately sounded very familiar, like, oh, that sounds like people I know. Like that sounds like the people I love. I didn't know you could write poems like that. Right. And so immediately I was taken with that kind of idea. And I was the only one in class raising my hand. Like I was very excited. And so I went on to write a poem that year that won the district poetry contest, and they gave me a trophy. And you don't win no trophies for like reading. And I wasn't an athlete. So then I was in. That was it. I was like, oh, I got a trophy for poems. Set. No. But it was the kind of expression that I had been looking for. I had been scribbling little stories, and reading was always really important to me, just kind of the way words worked. And so that was just kind of unlocking, the floodgate, I think, when I figured out
wonderful
poems could do that. Yeah.
And for all you teachers out there, big up to all the teachers out there. I don't know that they all know the little moments that create the worlds that we're living in today. So
that's right.
Shout out to the teachers, both past and current.
Yes.
I was looking through sort of, as I'm doing my little bit of research and looking through the your promo material. Not only are you a Cave Canem fellow, but one of the things, and the many other things, the list is too long. You did the do. Yeah. But there's a mention of an Affrilachian poet.
Yes.
And I looked into the term and came across Frank Walker. And,
yep.
I'd love for you to talk to us about what that means and sort of what the intention is of being a Affrilachian poet.
Yeah, we hear the phrase Appalachian all the time, and you already mentioned Frank X. Walker, genius poet. He along with another, poet that I will always stand under the altar of, Nikki Finney, kind of coined this term and convened a group of poets that they started calling the Affrilachian poets, right? Because often, Black folks are left out of the stories of Appalachia. And Appalachia, it's such a huge swath from Virginia all the way down through Kentucky, this huge swath of region and a particular type of folks. And they have a particular, story, mythologies, language, food, culture, heritage that's coming through, constantly now. I'm seeing it everywhere, thanks to people like Crystal Wilkinson. And so their intent was to say, hey, Black folks are here too, right? And so this, like many of the other collectives that were happening kind of really early on, a few decades ago, Darkroom is happening, Affrilachian Poets are happening, kind of in the midst of a Cave Canem coming to be, these groups of folks that are looking for other poets that are working in the vein of a certain tradition. And this one just happened to be a regional one. So they wanted to make sure that, Black folks weren't left out of that story.
I love that. I
Yeah.
love that. I
Yeah.
came across a quote that Frank's Mr. Walker said, part of what we've done as Affrilachian poets is to commit to the idea of making the invisible visible,
Yes.
giving the muted a voice, because we always felt like that structure designed to make us feel invisible.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that alone just encapsulates so much into that statement beyond, but also beyond in the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, and I think, Black poets have been, we've been doing this work for a long time, right? Like making what's invisible visible, but also, Natasha Trethewey has this term, historical erasure. So like railing against this kind of historical erasure, right? And certainly we're doing that in our communities and our pathways, but people like Frank X. Walker are doing it in the work too.
Yeah.
Frank is kind of like making sure that he tells the stories culturally of these poets or these folks that have kind of just been traditionally left out of, the American story. And I think many of us are doing that. That's something that I've been doing as well, but doing it much closer to home.
I love that. I love that.
Yeah.
I love the fact that you ended that with home, because, what I'm always interested in is sort of where people, whether it be where they grow up or where they settle, how that sort of impacts their work. And I'd love to understand how being where you are, being in the South, what does that, what does that do for your work? Is there a responsibility that comes along with that, because you're seated in the South?
Yeah. That's interesting. I was talking to Mike before we started about the fact that I'm actually, my bio says I'm from Phoenix, Arizona, which is true. So I grew up out west, away from, most of my family that was here in the South. And then we migrated back to help take care of my grandmother, my mother's mother, until she passed in 2007. And so, I've been firmly in the South now for about 2 decades. And it was always the place I wanted to be, even when I wasn't here. And I'm starting to, I wrote a memoir a few years ago, and the first essay is called Imagining Home. So as we're talking about home, it's always been a phrase that's been very loaded for me, right? And so I'm also an Army brat, so I moved all around before that landing in Phoenix. But there was something about this space that always felt like the space where I could be closest to myself. Right. And I think a lot of that was that the people who knew me well and the people who raised me up were on this side of the world. So there was that, right? And I think now that I've been here and I've been trying to figure out, what it means to be a Southern poet for the last 2 decades, I don't know if I feel necessarily a responsibility to write about the South. But because it is a place that carries me, and I mean that very seriously, I'm always grateful to write about the South.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting, we have certainly as Black poets, it's a reckoning with kind of every place that we'll be in this country, right? There's so much. And any place really in the diaspora, because that's, something that I've been reckoning with in this work too. So, not just the South, but, it's a place that has so much loaded history and difficulty and trauma. But it is also a place that carries so much joy and resilience and resistance and all of those things that kind of like make us miraculous. And so that's why I think it's just a place that I continue to write about and feel most comfortable in as well.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's funny because it conjures up all these things to me. I was born in London, in England, right? So, and then coming to the States and sort of stepping into the humidity. It's the United States. But there's always been, part of the reason why I asked this question is because since I got here and I grew up in for the most part in Brooklyn on the East Coast, although that framed me, there's always been this pull, like this invisible rope to the south. And
Interesting.
yeah, and part of that question was really selfish because I'm trying to figure out
What is it?
what is it? Is that pull to the south, and I don't know, my wife sometimes says we got to check what in your previous life what you were doing because there's something going on there. But it's always super interesting for me to dig into sort of like how an environment grows a poet, and informs sort of the positions they take with things. But I love the idea of you saying that it's also a place that holds you up, what I mean?
For sure.
Gives you that structure. So, one of the other things I've seen is that you're a mom, right? How does being a mom impact not just your work, but the decisions you make on what I'm going to put in the world?
That's a good question. I mean, it shifted everything. First of all, so me being a mom is one thing. Me being a stepmom is another thing, because it was add water instant family when I got married. So my kids were 12 and 4 when my husband and I got married. And now they're 25 and 19, 26 and 19. Jesus. And so like now they're big, and I'm a grandmother now, which is a whole nother step. We'll get to that.
Okay.
We'll get to that. Yeah, we'll get to that. But so I was so used to, they stepped into kind of the space of us and understood immediately, oh, this is what Remica does. She's a writer, right? Like she reads a lot and she writes occasionally. And so they understood that was kind of like part of my presence. They've been there through almost every book. The second book was released after my husband and I got married. So, I'm 5 books in now. But the third book, which is called Starlight and Era, was a book of love poems that I started writing after, my husband and I found each other again. And it was the only time I had to consider, oh, wait, am I allowed to tell a story that might come back to haunt them in the years to come? I can tell all my business because that's mine. I'm grown. And also, the grown people in the family, this is a conversation that the grown people in the family have too, because I have a poem in my first book called Fish Fry, and it used to be called Why I Wasn't Invited to the Last Fish Fry, because look, Tshaka, people was like, oh, you putting everybody business in the street. Don't that girl listening? So the grown people had some issues with me writing things too. They've since come around. Now they say, Rika, come in here and write this down because somebody got to do something about it. So, now they've come around, a few books in, they know I'm serious. But for the kids, it really was, I had a real consideration for their feelings, for things that I was revealing that might not seem sensitive to me, but felt sensitive to them. So I kind of read them their poems. I also share my poems with my parents all the time, right out of the gate. My mother is my first reader because she's going to tell me about myself real quick. She also going to tell me when I get it wrong. And so, and if I'm writing family history, then I better have another family historian, on my back. So with the kids, they've now come to understand that, I try to write about them, in the best light, but I don't try to pretend like, we're perfect. And so, but I do know that their stories are theirs. Maybe they'll be writers. Maybe they'll have something different to tell. So I try to kind of frame it so that, most of the stories, they absolutely get to be present, but I talk about how they've changed me, not necessarily how, we've impacted them. And so I'm hoping, they're very, very, very supportive. My daughter, my goodness, this whole run with Room Swept Home, she has done everything, down to like creating really beautiful, I don't know if you can see that, really beautiful like gifts and bookmarks and like gorgeous paperweights, and she's crafty in a way that I absolutely am not. My son, really came to, be cool. There was a line that I had in one of the poems that he used to hate that I read from the time he was probably 10 to 15. Now he's gotten over it. And so, they're very supportive. They care for me and understand that this is one of the ways that I get out my questions about the world. So they're loving in that way.
I love that. I love that. And so, you mentioned that being a grandmother, like what,
Yeah.
that's a whole now,
Yeah.
like
You
that's a
see
whole
how my face lights up? That's a shame. Them
that
kids
is,
gonna be mad.
that's
Listen,
beautiful. That's
that
beautiful.
baby.
I mean,
Mm.
I've got a, 14-year-old going on 35. Uh,
Yes.
it's a whole
Yes.
different story.
It is.
But I can
You'll
imagine,
make it. You'll make it out. I swear.
look, I'm reading,
Woo!
I'm running, I'm exercising, I'm doing
Yep.
all the things.
Yep.
I'm doing all the things, but she's beautiful. She's wonderful, and
Yeah.
is what keeps me going.
Yeah.
But in that same vein, I look at the things I was writing pre her. I look at the things that I'm writing with her here. I'm trying to put a book, finishing a book together that's sort of like messages to her.
Oh,
But
love
as I'm putting this body of work together, there's two challenge. Well, one main challenge, right, is around the fact that so much is changing around her so quickly,
yeah.
and she's changing,
Yeah.
right? So the world, the world I see when she was 3, and some of the poems that I'm pulling about, it's a completely different thing.
Oh, yeah.
So in that same vein, when you look at like this grandchild and what this grandchild is sort of coming into now, and then potentially that maybe later on,
Yeah.
like how does that, I don't want to say how does that impact your work, because I don't know that it's hit that yet, but does that is that a challenge? Do you think about sort of looking at that baby? What does that do to your feeling about your work, and what responsibility? Again, I keep throwing out that word, but
Yeah.
what comes with that?
It's interesting. I don't know if it changes the way I feel about the responsibility in my work. It makes me more anxious about the world just in general, like having these people that, you want to protect in the world. It continues to be, as crazy and critical as it can be. So there's that. Um, I also try not to censor myself in the writing and creating of my work. So if I thought so deeply about responsibility, that might slow me down in some cases, um, or respectability, that might slow me down in some cases.
Right.
And so I don't know if I think about that a whole lot. I do think about how quickly time passes and how different it will be, even when it comes into the world. For instance, you know, uh, when my second book came out, I got, a whole host of cousins and godbabies and all these people that I raised as well. And I had this one poem that I wrote for my cousin Nicole, and it's something like Nicole at 7 years old. And when the book came out, she was 14. Right? That's the title of the poem. And then when the book actually made it into the world, she was a completely different person, of course.
Yeah.
And the world had shifted as well. The same thing with my grandbaby. He's 6 now. He just graduated kindergarten. And the last poem that I wrote for Room Swept Home, when I knew this book was done, it's a book about my grandmothers, was when I wrote a poem where he entered the space and he was a baby and he was singing to my husband in his ear, right? So that shifted my understanding. When I became a grandmother, I could end this book about my grandmothers. For me, there was some kind of like full circle kind of moment that happened for me. And that's where I could finally, kind of let go and let God with some of these poems. And so I try not to think too much about, what I might be missing for them, especially as the world progresses faster than I can imagine. I think of these poems and I talk to them about these poems being a snapshot in time. So I hope I'm preserving something for them that they might not have known were it not for this work.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's it. That and in Genesis, that's what that sort of collection is for me, is just time is moving, but here are these things I just want you to pick up, because some things are cyclical,
Yeah.
some things are never going to change.
Yeah.
But no, that's a beautiful sentiment, and that whole wrapping around to being that point when you're saying, okay, I'm done, like this is good, this is good now, because it's I think it's sometimes very difficult to come to that point, whether it be to end a poem or end a book or whatever it may be. It's like,
Absolutely. It was extremely difficult. This was probably the hardest. I couldn't figure it for a long time. I couldn't figure out where it should stop. right? Like, what's the stopping point? And that for me was it was a real gift when I realized that, I was stepping into that new phase of myself.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. So we're gonna get into the book in a little bit.
Okay.
You know, not only just the reference to the book, not only just the genesis of how it came together. Before even getting the work into the work, when I was reading I mean, I'm calling it a masterpiece because I wrote it in,
I didn't even pay you, Tshaka. I
no, but look, I
appreciate
don't
that.
say this. I don't say, and maybe it's because I'm in the motion of putting this book together myself. But
Yeah,
there's so many pieces of this that I'm
family
just
book.
like,
Yeah,
okay, let me relook at this. Let me scrap this part. And the most important piece was, for me, was, is that what I'm actually trying to do with this? You know what I mean? And so going and reading through your book, there's so much intention. There's so many pieces that I feel that was so deliberate
absolutely.
it just made me recap. So I do say masterpiece, and I do thank you for it. But there's work there under the page titled "In the Corridor."
Yeah.
There's so much food in this page. That entire
Yeah,
section.
that I stuck an essay in the
But
book of
look,
poems. I was like, it has to be there. Sorry.
I mean, that alone could be a whole BBB session, just that page.
Yeah.
That page alone. But there's one line in there that says it's difficult for most Black Americans to trace ancestors before 1865,
Yep.
as it is for me. So I've been looking for cultural and regional history to fill in the minutia of the times.
Yeah.
Now, I can go on and on, but this alone talks to, for me, like the challenges of documenting our history.
Yes.
How was going through this for you? Where do you feel that, sort of we need to document this Black journey in sort of in America going forward? I know those are two very broad questions, but sort of for you, what does that feel like? And then, where does that lay in the rest of America?
Those are really broad questions, but I mean, we're here to answer them. And so for me, you start doing a work like this is a book that there's so much research. I mean, it's a book of poems with a bibliography in it, and that's just a selected bibliography. Like we had to pare that thing down because there's so much work that happens. So I was doing personal family history, and then we'll talk a little bit about the coincidence that kind of brought me to the book itself. But there was so much missing. I mean, Black women are left out of the archive. Like there really is no, I've been saying it now, I think more since the genesis of this book, but it's something that I've been trying to write us back into for my entire career, since I started writing poems like that. But I didn't realize that. But also for me, now you hear these wonderful terms that are very useful in research, like ethnography, where we're doing interviews and we're doing kind of like we're asking people who lived in a region, tell me what happened because we know your story wasn't collected then, right? And so, for me, those kinds of like family stories that were passed down, but I had no way to prove them, and people didn't understand that they were these kind of like pinpoints in this tapestry of the country. To me, it was just a travesty. Right. And I knew, these are, I say all the time, my two grandmothers here are very ordinary people who had, kind of extraordinary moments in their lives. Right. And because of those extraordinary moments, it gives me a story, it gives me plot. Yeah. Right. But this is, I mean, really, this work is the work that so many of the folks that I grew up with, like, oh, it's miraculous. They all did this. Like they all managed to get us here through these extraordinary circumstances. Yeah. And so I just felt like women didn't get enough say. They didn't get to tell their own stories. So a lot of this is kind of in persona. They didn't get to give context for much of what happens in family history. And particularly folks who, were poor. We're adding another layer to the folks who were left out of the archive. And so for me, it was important to create a family archive for myself. But also because this story is just as worthy as any of the other American stories. And also it gives us some real, if we do this work, it gives us real insight as to like how we got here.
Yeah.
Right where we are in the historical moment. So that to me was, it's forever going to be useful.
Yeah. It's a quilt,
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
it's beautiful. And I can imagine tiring.
Yes.
You always hear these statements and you see in these TV shows, or the behind a good man there's a good woman, I mean, and it's left there.
Uh-huh.
And that's
Be
just
like,
what it's
hey,
left.
hey,
And
she can talk, she can say.
you know what I mean? And it's like, and I think, especially in Black families, I don't care where you are, the tenor of the day is determined.
By the matriarch. Let's be clear.
Okay.
Let's be clear. Yeah.
And that is such a fact, but it's just, sort of brushed under the rug. So
Yeah.
when I see work like this that really, sort of highlights that, it's incredible. What is the role of a poet?
Oh, shoot. Back to that essay, there's this long line where I kind of run down the many roles of a poet. I mean, really, for me, the role of a poet is to be, to wrestle truth, and to be clear. Clarity to me is even more important than beauty, but we are the arbiters of beauty as well. Right? If you're a good poet, you're doing both.
Right.
Right? If you're a good poet, you're working hard to do both, and it takes a long time. I mean, I tell my students all the time, for every poem that I write, 30 to 40 revisions in general.
Okay.
Right? Like some might be a little less and some might be a lot more.
Right.
But I mean, so it looks like sleight of hand. So it looks like you're really doing something. But that's painstaking, work to try to get to clarity, because I understand how I feel and I understand what I think about the matter, but I'm not trying to get you to think about the matter in the same way. I'm just trying to get you to think. Right. And to do that, it has to be clear enough for anyone to come to it and bring whatever they need to the experience.
And that's important. Now, when you say clarity, are you saying clarity in the message, or are you saying clarity in the language, or both?
I'm saying language first, right? Because for me, poetry isn't about beating somebody over the head. It's not necessarily very didactic. Messagey poetry doesn't necessarily work for me as a reader and as someone who comes to the page, or a listener. But for sure, I can bring poetry can illuminate something that I thought I knew everything about. Right. And particularly experience. Poetry for me, and the way that I try to use it with my students, is about empathy. Right. So poetry is a way for me to understand someone else's pain in my heart, or someone else's joy, or someone else's sorrow, or someone else's, excitement. Right. So poetry is kind of a vessel for those things. But it's not like this is how you should think. Right. In fact, those kind of poems, I think, are heavy-handed and exhausting. So when I say clarity, I'm talking about the language.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I love that. And so, what do you say to the student who says, I have these stories, I have these poems, but why should anybody care about what I gotta say?
Oh, that's so interesting. I mean, I talk to students all the time about the singular voice being the way that often, we learn about the world as a whole. Right. So, even myself, this is something that people have to keep drilling into us. Like I said, I the memoir that I released a few years ago is called Soul Culture, but it started out as these interviews with Black poets. The elders to me are kind of everything. So I was interviewing these Black poets that I really love. And eventually I was just going to put these interviews together because people needed to hear, what Lucille Clifton had to say, and they needed to hear what Sonia Sanchez had to say, and A. Van Jordan, right? But when it came time to kind of, get that into the world, interestingly enough, people kept saying these actually, these essays that you've written in between that are kind of the through line, that is the voice that is standing out. And my brilliant white woman editor, Haley Lynch at Beacon, said to me in one of our talks before she was my editor, the Black woman's singular voice is not a voice that we hear enough. And I said, of course it's not. And she said, that's your voice. So your voice is not a voice that we hear enough. And I thought, I've been saying this to my students for decades. And it took someone else to say it to me. Right? Yeah. So that is something that I go back to. I think that has to do with us, just one, sometimes maybe it's humility, but also just maybe it's not us not understanding how important the singular voice is in getting across human experience. And for my students, I tell them, no one has lived what you live. No one has seen what you've seen, but what you've seen might help them understand what they've seen.
Yes.
And so that's what we're trying to do.
I love it. Yeah. What's your favorite word?
Ooh. Okay, my favorite. These kinds of questions are my favorite kind of question ever. My favorite word today, or just like sound wise, or whatever came to mind when you said my favorite word.
Yeah. You want
all those things?
Well, kind of. Yes.
True. Miraculous is a word that I go back to a lot. I like what it means. I like how it sounds. I like how it feels in the mouth. I also love words that aren't necessarily my words. Like words that are in other languages. I love reina, queen in Spanish. I love, my mom would probably be mad, but I love the way menage a trois sounds.
Oh, I know.
Right? So there's all these words in other languages that, that I kind of roll around in my mind. But then the words that I love in the language that I write from, in my only language I speak, it changes daily.
Okay.
And often they're very ordinary words. I love a poem that can use the word thing, THING, really well. There are some words that make my skin crawl in the language as well. So there's so many. It changes daily, but so many.
So is there a word that instantly when you see it, it brings you joy? It makes you smile.
There a word that instantly when I see it. It's so cheesy, but for real, home. It's really, it's usually a very simple word, but home, also the word lovely. I know it has to do with the alliteration of the L's, but also I just think the way the word is formed, it's really beautiful. Yeah. So weird. You can't ask poets questions about words because it's so weird.
It's great.
But really and truly, home is a word that I see it and I feel like, immediately there's a reverence and a warmth.
Yeah. I love that. Just like you said, the word love. Like to me, when you look at the word, it looks like a hug.
It does. And then lovely, if you tack on, it's just so much.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, I know we get to the point of wanting you to read. I do want to mention something that I think is that's really important for me, at least Lisa Kane. Right?
My dear. My dear love.
That cover art is phenomenal. Talk to me a bit about what you felt like when the first time that was sort of unveiled for you as the cover of this book.
I'll tell you. Can I tell you a little bit of the story behind it first before I tell you how I felt about that? First of all, I hope people can see it.
You can see it, yeah.
Ooh, that's Room Swept Home, the cover. And so first, thank you, Wesleyan University Press. Kind of everything that I dreamed up for this book, it's very unconventional. There's family images, there's historical images, there's bibliographies, there's mini essays, there's hybrid poems, there's crowns of sonnets. Then, I was absolutely adamant about the artwork, that it had to be something very bright, and it had to be something that went back to this idea of history, kind of imposing itself. And so I was looking at all these collage artists, like just stalking people on Instagram, just like any artist I could find, like just saving stuff. And I would send stuff to the press. And so Lisa was an artist that I was just watching. I didn't know Lisa at all and didn't know much about her work, but she does these historical collage images. So it'll be a beautiful painting, and then there'll be these Black figures that are there. And so when we reached out to Lisa, we had found a piece that she'd done, and we said, well, maybe if we could crop it this way and do this. We knew we wanted 3 women on the cover. And she did not know me at all, but Lisa said, well, let's have a little conversation. And so we talked, and she said, tell me about your grandmothers. Tell me about Minnie and Mary, these women that you're writing about. So we ended up talking for an hour at least. I sent her poems, and she came back and said, we're under a deadline, but we can't use a piece of a painting that's already done for these women. They have to have their own work. We have to pay. We have to create something for these women. And then in 3 weeks, she would call me on the phone, like we're talking today. She would call me and say, okay, let's talk about what we need to see. Like the blue that's in the sky, I added that over the phone with her. The image of like the broom that we snuck in the front, that goes back to the idea of room swept home. The water that's there, there's a collard green garden in the back of it, because they both grew greens and were farmers. And so she created this. I picked the figures, the historical figures that are there. I chose them myself. So Lisa Kane is a self-taught, brilliant artist out of Houston, Texas, but is also just a down home girl, like a Southern girl that deeply understood how important it was to make sure that we like just cared for these women.
Yeah.
And so when I finally saw the whole piece, I cried like a baby, like really hard. I mean, as hard as you can cry without like, double clutching, I just, that's how hard I cried when I saw it. And then I just, there's no way for me to thank her for all the things, but now we've become friends. We've got an event coming up at the Kennedy Center in October with some other brilliant Black women artists. So, I mean, she kind of changed my perspective about what was possible with artwork and thinking about poems and illuminating those poems.
Honoring these wonderful women. That's fantastic. That's fantastic. Yeah. All right. Look, I'm gonna stop talking and
okay.
let the folks hear some of your work, and then we'll jump in and have a couple questions for you afterwards. But I am going to turn the microphone over to you.
Okay. So we've talked around the book, but I'll just give you a really quick intro before I read a few of the poems. So my great paternal grandmother, Minnie Lee Folks, was interviewed for the WPA slave narratives in the 1930s. She lived in Petersburg, Virginia in 1941. And it turns out that my maternal grandmother, Mary Etta Knight, they did not know each other. They were at opposite ends of their lives. Was within 1 mile of my paternal grandmother at the same time in 1941, because she was sent to the Central Lunatic Asylum for the Colored Insane in Petersburg 9 days after she birthed her first child. It was postpartum. They didn't know anything about postpartum at the time, and certainly not about care in the way that we think of it now. Particularly for Black women. And so when I found out that those 2 women converged the same space, it was kind of too much for me to bear. So I decided to write through their stories and to create kind of a through line to myself and the other folks that they ushered in as well. So in addition to that cover that we were talking about and those images, there's a big family tree that was created by another firm, Vibe by Design, 2 Black women. So it's just been a labor of love to bring these stories to light. And I'm going to try to just read a few of the poems that are in the voices of each woman. And so I'll start with one that's in Minnie's voice, who was born in 1859. So she was enslaved until she was 6 years old, and gives a very, very detailed, vivid, detailed account of her time on the plantation, because she's talking to, when she's interviewed for the WPA slave narratives, it's very uncharacteristic to be interviewed by anyone other than a white government worker. But a Black woman educator, another teacher in Petersburg, Susie Bird, who was a friend of most of the folks in the area and was a Black woman, interviewed her. So she gets very candid in many ways. So when they ask her, do you know when the war ended? She says, oh, I think it was April when the war surrendered. And that's the title of the poem. So this is in Minnie's voice. April when the war surrendered, but we didn't know till May, 'cause Miss Godsey ain't said a word. But after, we stomped and cried and made freedom songs, joy in the hands, joy in the feet, even the quiet a jubilee. Freedom sweeter than what any man say. We danced, made drums from tin, and carried on till Sunday, till someone asked where we was heading. A whole lot of folks took off for nowhere. Other folks went looking for children. Some, like me, were children, but had nothing, no one. Mama and I stayed on. Mama ain't like Mrs., but where would we go? That lady cried something awful, said she'd clothe us, give us cornmeal and lard. I worked her land and cooked, learned to tend the garden and count what little was ours. So, what's interesting is there's so much during this research, because then I needed to research what happened to folks after emancipation, what was happening to folks in particular in Petersburg, Virginia, which was a huge tobacco town, and still in many ways is, we think slavery and we think cotton, but even those who were enslaved were being walked to tobacco factories mostly and then taken back to the plantation. And so this is Stripped Tobacco Like Greens. It's a poem that kind of talks through what even the women were doing decades after emancipation as well. So, and this is something Minnie worked in tobacco for many years, as did much of my family. Stripped tobacco like greens. Ain't much difference. Soak them in water to ease the leaves, then pull the largest ones to wrap the bundle. These called the hands. We, the stemmers, all women on the line, rows filled with traveling songs. I sang as a child at the feet of my mother. She bound the leaves, packed in hogsheads. Some found bodies in the large drums, put there for punishment or fun. During the war, the factory was a hospital. All the wounded gathered like cutlery. For a time, cared for, shined. Work moved outdoors, never stopped. In the years after, we get nary $1 a day, pennies enough for those notes thrown wild into the field, low and worn, the singing from children's dancing mouths, those hands like ours, vein heavy, softened, worked over, sweet aroma unto heaven, little more than ash and plenty to men. Our mothers upended, invented, inventors. Our fathers a secret or kept under the tally, thread woven through throat, groin, and spine. Bitter stem, bitter greens, yellow leaves. Little soothes the busy hand, the flying mind. So I'm gonna shift around a little bit. and maybe read two of Mary's poems, and then maybe close with something from the end. So my maternal grandmother, Mary Etta Knight, was only 18 when she was sent to the asylum. She stayed there for 2 months and 13 days, though she always contended that she was there for 9 months, long enough to have another baby. She was on parole for a year, so had to continue to check in there. And so that really shifted so much of her early life with her first child. And so I'll read a poem that has the date that she was taken to the asylum. It kind of tells part of the story too. June 18th, 1941. The clothes are on fire. In her mind, the clothes are covered in blood. The spot of lard or flour from cooking spreads until her clothes are tar and feather. The clothes are another body, a scaly skin, an animal covering, a fresh kill. The clothes are a burlap sack filled with wet cotton, a factory of tobacco, a winding sheet. Years later, the clothes will be the evidence neighbors use, the talk they'll whisper that children overhear and sing as taunts. That's why your mama's crazy, running through the streets naked, and you just like her, children will say to her daughters, and the fabric will unravel again and again, like the long night, the lost year, the still burning mind. So after she spent time at the asylum, she came home and rebuilt herself. Just like many, she went on to have 7 children. Many actually had 11 children before passed. But all of Mary's children are still living. She got them here and kept them here for a good long time. And so she went on to be a domestic, like many women were in the South at the time. And I'm going to read a little poem that kind of harkens back to that experience. That is kind of a ladder. So it's a poem that reads one way down and then reverses itself and reads itself back. And this is a poem that is entirely true. The 2 white women I cleaned for send checks until the day I die or until they do, whichever comes first. It could be devotion. It could be guilt, maybe kindness. We die together, always wondering what we missed in each other. Was I a comfort? Were they a holding place? A pen? Writing letters solves little of the mystery. A reminder we live wound around each other. Conductors passing back and forth what brightness we could hold. The world was heavy and hard. You loved my work. Every day I rose, I returned. My work. Every day I rose, I returned. The world was heavy and hard. You loved what brightness we could hold around each other. Conductors passing back and forth, a reminder we live, wound. Writing letters solves little of the mystery. Were they holding a place, a pen we missed in each other? Was I a comfort? We die together, always, wondering what it could be. Guilt, maybe kindness, it could be devotion. So you can see in this book, I'm trying to parse through family history, trying to parse through some of the American record as well, since Tshaka was so astute and asked about some of that. I'll read a poem that I never get to read from the book. There's a section in the middle that kind of does some of that, I think, wrestling with where we are in the country, and it's called What We Had to Pass Through to Get Here. And this poem is Eden Before the Fall, Southern Pastoral. Something like paradise, the old myths say. The endless hills, green and steady as envy. Clay roads paved with dawn, red like flesh undone. The tree of life was ecstatic, weeping. Angels weren't yet at the door. But everywhere the animals were called by their given names. Jane and George, Miss Anne and Master, Hope and Desire, they called the ships. No one could pass through without permission. The houses were grand. The columns appeared as if by providence out of thin air. I think we're still figuring out this dance around each other in the South and beyond. So the book kind of makes its way to my story because I thought it would be strange if you didn't see what came of the stretched drain of folks that those women ushered in. So maybe I'll read just one of those sonnets and close with a poem that really reckons with joy. All right, let's see how we're doing. Good. I'll read one of those sonnets and a poem that reckons with joy. Yeah. So I think so much of who we are comes from all of these different people that kind of piece us together. Some of those are always going to be cousins. And I'm always shocked at how cousins always come running as soon as we need each other. So this is Tumbling the Barricade Between Then and Now, which is the title. The sonnets are called the Lose Your Mother Suite, and they all take their titles from lines in Saidiya Hartman's brilliant book, Lose Your Mother, which is about her travel to try to figure out kind of heritage in the diaspora by going back to the continent. And so this is kind of what happens when one of the grandmothers passes away. Cousins come whenever love demands we clean house. Things gathering dust become our dowry. Porcelain cowries, upturned tusks, one pearl earring, and a clowned face figurine. We find them scouring grandmother's closets and floor, trinkets left to us harboring burdens on earth. What could she have kept to appease us? Notes? Luck? Barely anything short of her coming back would relieve us. We sweep the crumbs of adornment into a pile near the threshold beside our faith, our heavy laughter, our misery. All gone, she taught us when we begged for milk or stories of her mother. Now we bear children and their undoing. Little things we possess left here in ruins. And so, I know I'm reading much of the difficulty of this life, but these are the things that poets wrestle with, right? Like I often write poems to question. I don't really get a whole lot of answers from the poems, but I write to figure out, what questions I can ask about the world and how. And so I'm going to end with a poem because we've gone back to that word that I really love, and you'll hear it in the first line. But as I was doing this work, working on this book, I would talk to my husband all the time about the fact that, like, it's just amazing that these two crossed paths, and it's amazing that they helped all of these children and grandchildren and great-grands get here, and my husband asked me very near the end of of what I thought was the writing of the book. Well, where is that poem? You have to write that poem about why you think it's amazing that you all have managed to be here. And so I'll end with this. There is nothing in your story that says you should be here. And I hope it's a mantra for all of us. Let's just call it what it is, miraculous, or nothing but time and chance, a hair's breadth of the divine sense of humor, what wasn't planned, but tickled everyone watching. First, the nearly indestructible forced onto ships, then babies born on plantations, surviving the South, daughters and sons impatient and fearless, heading north. A girl follows her sister from Norfolk to Fort Monmouth. A boy sees her picture on a mantle and vows to marry her. Those were my parents. His father fell in love with a waitress in Petersburg who served him sweet potato pie and milk, a baby herself, and he, slick-sleeved, just stationed at Fort Lee. He carried her as far from there as he could, on and on this love, up the coast, in the heart of all wars. Children die and children gather. One finds another, and every star extends its hand to a new windswept door. There should be no possibility of you, but here you are, an opening, a crossing, and here every instrument brimming with sound, every seed a body inconspicuous in the garden. You are a spectacular disruption, a tempest. And with that knowledge that you have been remarkably made, call to yourself in the distance. The world will arrive to meet you, and you will not be afraid. Thank you.
Wow. Wow. Thank you so much for that work. People, you know, brighten your life a little bit. Find this work. You know, read from this wonderful individual. There's just so much in it, and there's just so much heart in your work, particularly I feel with this particular book, and make sense of where it's coming from. And like I mentioned before, like this, the intention
Yeah.
in this book. I love, you mentioned, you had there's pictures here and there's something, and I'm just like, but that to me was sort of it's, how can I put it? It's almost like how this is gonna sound really weird. You know how cats, right? When cats are and they see stuff and they get the paw and they grab it and they pull it in and then they
Yes.
grab it and they pull it. That's how I felt like reading.
Good.
And I was grabbing all the stuff and pulling it in. Wanderlust for me, that's
Oh,
the landing on that.
I looked at it. I almost read that. I've never read that poem aloud. I looked at
Really?
it. I was like, yeah, I don't think I have.
I was in a coffee shop reading that, and I got to that, and I was just like, let's just close this book. Let me just close this and breathe for a little bit. So thank you. And it reaffirms to me, especially how you ended this session here on, like, I tell my daughter all the time, I don't know that I believe in coincidences.
Yeah.
I think everything is planned. And when you look at how, to your point, how minute of things have to come together for you to be here right now.
Oh yeah.
It's an amazing concept to even grapple with. And you see on social media, there's one where folks say, okay, they go into, like, in order for you to be here, 2 people had to be together, and then 4, and then 16, and blah blah blah. And you're like
what?
32,000, and you haven't even gone too far down the line.
Right.
It really makes you sort of understand that.
That's right.
All right, there's one part I love to start wrapping up these things with. I have a couple questions, and we're gonna go to what I call the Who Dat section. and
Who that? Okay.
that section and the quick fire section. But before I get there, if your book was an actor or a singer, who would it be?
Oh no. This is so good. Don't confuse my oh no for not being very happy to answer this kind of question. If my book was an actor or a singer, oh, this is interesting. Because I was thinking one thing and then I was like, no. Wow, I guess if it was a singer, it would have to be Aretha. Right.
Mm,
If you look at the scope of Aretha's life,
yes.
sheesh. I mean scope in every way. Like this is just from her early upbringing to all of what's happening even by the time she's a teenager. I mean, she got 2 kids, she moving through and trying to figure out if she's going to be secular or stay spiritual. I mean, so just talk about somebody whose life ran the gamut, and
Yeah.
this book does everything. It's everything in the kitchen sink.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think that's why I guess it would have to be Riri if it was anybody,
All
right?
right.
The original Riri. No diss to Rihanna. It's not.
Right. Right. The
No,
original.
for real.
Okay.
I would never play like that.
No, but let's get the record straight.
Yeah, but
That too.
she would say that too. She would say the original too.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If there was a sort of a bucket list audience, like you always like these are the folks or the space that I would want to read my work to, who would that be?
Oh, I'm always writing for Black women.
Mm.
Yeah, like deeply and surely. And everybody else who wants to come along for the ride, I'm so grateful.
Right,
But it's for them.
right,
Yeah,
right.
very seriously. And this one I think, for Black women who got a little who have a little experience under their belt, because like you said, the work is really layered, it's really nuanced. You have to be able to look back at something to really grasp what's happening in the moment. So yeah, but I mean my audience, it doesn't change. I'm writing for me.
Right. Okay. I love that. I'm writing for me. I love
Yeah.
that. I'm writing that down. What was the most surprising thing you learned when creating this particular piece of work?
There were so many surprises. I mean, this is probably not what you're thinking of, but I mean, I think children are only here to teach us patience, and maybe books are only here to teach us patience as well. I mean, when it routinely takes me a long time to write books. This book took 7 to 10 years to write, but I had to wait 75 years for my grandmother's medical records to even request those records, just because of for HIPAA laws, and so finding out how the actual story, and then it could have been 1 page or it could have been 100 pages. It turned out to be like 30 pages of in-depth, very useful information, but I was just shocked at the detail. And also, I shouldn't have been shocked by this, but there was one part of the record that they had to do a full kind of write-up of the family and the incident beforehand. And what happens is the same thing that happens with Serena Williams while she's having her baby. I mean, she walks them through. No blood came. I'm telling you, this is about to happen. This is about to happen. This is about to happen. She's a Black woman that's trying to like advocate for herself in the moment before the break happens. It seems like she got blood poisoning and it came upon her really quickly. And no one listened. But they wrote it all down.
Right.
And they were just fine taking her to this asylum and talking through, and no one listened at all. The difference, now, and this is in the midst of me finding, like Linda Villarosa's work about weathering and like women and the Black mother's mortality rate. And it's like, it's just for the grace of God that she's even here. But like, we're still doing this work. Serena Williams got all the money in the world and knows her body probably better than any one of us could ever imagine, because she fine-tuned that instrument forever, right? Yeah. And still, were it not for people who finally said, okay, well, maybe we should hear what you're saying, she might not be here for bringing a child into the world. And so that really shocked me that, man, this is the same, we're in the same place. Yeah. And now I think people are starting to understand what that lack of healthcare has kind of transferred into for many of us. And it's just something to think about. It's why, we have to be such advocates I have to be an advocate for myself every time I walk into a doctor's office because of the history of this care. So it was just shocking to me.
Yeah. No, that's exactly what I was looking for. I mean,
Okay.
it's exactly what I was looking for. You touch on this, we're in a world that's so, it's so important to document in this world, but nobody's reading it. It's just like you said, like,
right. I'm like, well, why did we do all that? Why do we do 5 pages of, and it's true, often it's just, okay, well, the part of the documentation is just a step, but it's not part of the care, it's so often. So that's something that, I think we just need to think about in every arena. Imagine if we actually read what social workers documented before we sent these children to prison or before we thought about, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Those kinds of, if we could really, 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 work on being proactive and not reactive, if we just paid attention to the information that we had at hand.
Look, if you go back to the British Museum, if you look at, across the board, it's written down.
Yeah.
So I don't know why there's any question.
Right. This belongs to.
You wrote it.
That museum question is crazy because it's like it's on this little card. Somebody wrote it, y'all, and then told everybody too. So why are we arguing about where it should be? What's the holdup?
I gotta tell you, man.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, we're gonna jump into the who dat section. Oh, one more question.
Oh, sure.
If you could choose any poet, contemporary, old or past, to edit your work, who would that be?
Oh no. Okay, I'm just gonna cheat a little bit. I don't know. It's cheating. She wrote some poems. I'm choosing Toni Morrison because we all know Morrison's life as an editor, but also Morrison is editing people like Lucille Clifton, editing Toni Cade Bambara, editing, Angela Davis. Like she's editing the people who have informed my understanding of the word, poets and prose writers alike. This woman contained multitudes, not to mention who she became, for us, right? The godmother of all, Black literature. And so, I would really, it's something that maybe I'm working on. Don't tell nobody I said it, but some essays about thinking about Morrison in that role, but like just to see what her process was.
Yeah.
Because I just can't imagine how laser sharp she was in those sessions and like writing notes, like just to see Morrison write notes on the work.
Yeah.
It
could be the work.
Right. So there are plenty of poets that I love deeply, but that, I have dreams that Toni Morrison would touch my work. So yeah.
All right. So the who dat section, 3 people. There are 3 people in an elevator. You're stuck in an elevator with 3 people.
So exciting
for
me.
3 hours. Who would you choose those 3 people to be, past or present?
I was about to say, do they have to be alive? Okay.
Yeah, past or present.
3 people, and I'm stuck for 3 hours.
Yeah, you got 3 hours with them in an elevator.
But with all 3 of them at the same time. It's not like I get one separate hour, one separate. Well, one is James Baldwin.
Okay.
Absolutely always. Any question you ever put, if I'm on an island, if I'm I'm with Baldwin. Okay. So that's one. They have to be writers. Did you say writers?
Anybody.
Anyone? Stevie Wonder.
Okay.
Is another. Really, we talk about, people that I think of as kind of like the ultimate genius, like beyond what we can understand. Stevie is one of those people. And now I only have one more. Jeez Louise. This is very important to me. All right. Today it's Lorraine Hansberry. I've been reading, I plays really, on any given day. I didn't want to be stuck in the elevator for 3 hours with all men. So August Wilson would have probably made it in there, but I'd already picked Stevie and Baldwin. And because men are going to overtalk each other anyway, I love y'all. Y'all are geniuses, but you are. And so, all right, so I had to round it out, but I've been reading a lot of Lynn Nottage. I've been reading a lot of, going back to August Wilson. I've been reading a lot of Susan Laurie Parks. And I know that Lorraine Hansberry is kind of the godmother of what we see happening in Black contemporary theater. And I would just love to pick her brain.
Thank you. I love that. I love that. I can't wait till I get to this part of the course because I get so many different, responses from
So
folks.
good.
And then the same thing that they get is like, wait, I can't just 3?
Right. I mean, but then you overthink yourself. Like you just, I was spiraling on the last one. I was like, just pick for today. That's who it would be.
Exactly. And in the vein of overthinking,
okay.
The last section that we have here that I call quickfire is I'm going to say some words and I want you to just respond with the first thing that comes to mind. A word, a phrase,
okay.
But what's the first thing that comes to mind when I say these words?
I'm gonna really try. I'm not cheating, but often when we play a game like this, I'll blank first and then the word will kind of materialize like it comes up slowly. So I'm not cheating. I'm really gonna tell you the first thing.
Your motion is your motion. Okay. All right.
Okay.
First word, language.
So weird. The word that came was spoken, which is kind of strange to me because I think of it as an oral art.
Yeah.
Okay. But all right. Yeah.
Blood.
Brother. Very easy, but really. Also I've been reading Bloods, which is an account of Black Vietnam War vets. And so, blood became, what they would call the brothers, in Vietnam. So it's not as simple as like blood brothers, but I think that's the vein that I'm thinking about. It's a brilliant book if folks haven't read it.
Wonderful. Oh, this is so great. Because it's like, where are you in this moment? I love it. Pain.
Come on, Robbie. Joy. Pain. Like sunshine and rain. Come on. Anyway, so clearly it's summer. I just want to party.
There you go. Black man.
That makes me happy. Loving is what came to mind.
Loving. Lineage.
Strange. I don't know why, but harmony came to mind. And I don't know if that means, for me, this is kind of, this whole cobbling together of lineage. It's kind of a harmonious bringing together of folks. So maybe that's why harmony came to me.
I like that. It's so simple. Woman.
Strong. Like, really. That's always going to come to mind.
Obviously.
Obvious.
History.
Weighty is what came to mind. And I mean that like a heaviness.
Yeah.
Right? It's very full. Yeah.
Legacy.
And I mean this very seriously. Nobody, you better don't take it as a diss. Beyonce came to mind. And I mean that deeply because, listen, this Cowboy Carter has been weighing on me for some months now because I think she really did that work, like a lot of that American history, Southern history, like digging work. So that's what came to mind. So Beyonce, call me, girl.
There you go. Hint, hint, wink, wink.
Right.
Joy.
We just did and pain. So that came up, but joy. Interesting. The ocean came up that time, and that's because I live very close to the beach. And when I want real, like, just happiness and to feel at peace, which to me joy is a combination of those things, I'm at the beach.
Black joy.
Ooh. Radical love ethic. I talk about it all the time as like those two going hand in hand.
Grandmother.
Oh, it makes me so happy. Friend came to mind.
I love that. I love that. Laughter.
Naveen, that's my grandbaby's name. That's what came.
Look, that
Yeah.
this is brilliant.
Yeah.
The South.
Hmm. What what came to mind is willows. So like willow trees.
Mhm.
But what I'm seeing, interestingly enough, that's the first time the entire day that I've seen an image. It was just like a whole row of willows blowing kind of in front of a shadowy house.
Southern.
That crunk came to mind. Ah! Listen, a lot of my references are gonna be hip hop references.
Look, I love it.
Yeah.
This is gonna be a little weird. Bridgerton.
Oh. I don't watch it and haven't read it, even though I'm not against romances and not against whatever, but Naked came to mind.
Because, right, which makes sense.
Because I've heard a lot about it.
Yeah, there you go. Ed- education.
Time came to mind.
Hmm.
And I don't know if it's time or if it's timing,
Right,
but interestingly enough, that's what came to mind. I think we're stealing some of that from
right.
some time. So maybe that's why.
I love that. It's all those pieces, right?
Hmm.
Religion.
Jehovah, you know, I'm one of Jehovah's Witnesses, so I think, that's always going to be my like deep. I'm always going to have a very specific reference for
Right.
God, for God's name. Yeah.
The blues.
This makes me proud as a poet. Sterling Brown came to mind. That was the first thing.
Wow.
Ooh, Sterling, look at that legacy you've left.
Yes.
Go read Sterling Brown's blues poems. Yeah.
Mhm.
Mm,
Gaza.
mm. Genocide.
Jim Crow.
Interesting. Heartless came to mind. Heartless.
Okay.
Ugh.
Andre 3000.
Oh, like really the best came to mind. I'm not playing. Andre,
Okay.
usually when I have to make my list of MCs, he's one or two.
Yeah.
And today he's one, obviously.
Got you.
The best came up. Yeah.
Progress.
Slow.
Wife.
I pray my husband is watching. Boolicious Lips came up because that is what my husband calls me when he is really playing. But Boolicious Lips. Hey, boo.
I love it. Daughter.
This is fair. Son came up, but I mean I saw them both, which is good. So I didn't think only of my daughter. I thought of my son too.
Soil.
You blanked out for a second. Soil.
Yeah, soil.
SOIL.
Yes.
Red clay. I'm in the South, so I'm working on a novel this summer, and it goes back to land a lot. Like I actually just the other day wrote a list of like 10 ways to describe soil, land. There's a family that's taking care of ancestral lands.
Nice. And war.
Pain.
Here it is. Well, that was my last word there.
That was so much fun.
This has been so brilliant. This has been fantastic. I'm so happy that your name came across my friend's lips, and then by way of that here, that I could sort of dig in and get this wonderful piece of work. People, again, please, you need to. Now, I don't know how to do this because I don't know how to do it when they do this.
Oh yeah, you got it. It's perfect.
It's working.
It's perfect because you're holding it right in front of yourself. You did exactly the right thing.
I did it perfectly. But this here, like, go make your life right, people.
That's a
Read
blurb.
this.
Don't
There's
make your life
so
right.
no, there's so much in there, and I feel I don't care. Whenever I write, I always look and I say, look, I want my work to be beyond this page, right? I want,
Yeah.
it's sort of like the Emerald Tablet. You read
Yeah.
this 10 years later, you get a whole different perspective, and that's what I feel in this work, that I will pick this up a year from now, and a whole different rush of ocean comes across me. So I want to thank you for that work. I want to thank you also for being for sharing.
Yeah.
This is a lot of you, and sort of your essence, both today and yesterday and the day before and the years before, and bringing this work into the light. I want to thank you for that, and having that courage. So I don't know. I sit here and thank you forever, but I think this is
Well, I
great.
thank you.
And here's the other piece, right?
Yeah.
Reading this book, and this is, I got time, yeah. So when folks talk about, they talk about poetry and the difference between literature and spoken word, and um, uh, page poetry and all that I
Uh-huh.
don't subscribe to.
Me
But
either.
there is something to be said about reading these poems and then hearing you read these
Hmm.
poems. Is I think is incredible. That's part of the reason
Oh.
why I asked, like, if anybody, if you had someone to do an audio recording of this
Ooh.
book, who would you pick?
Well, anybody other than me, I did it. This is the first of my audiobooks that I recorded, and it was painstaking because for many of the things that you've already laid out, there's all this legacy and stuff there deeply. But have you ever heard Ruby Dee has a book of poems, and Ruby Dee she did this re-release of Zora Neale Hurston of Their Eyes Were Watching God.
Really?
It's so beautiful.
Hmm.
So if Ruby Dee were here, I would say, Ruby,
Yeah.
please,
Yes.
could you care for usher these words in?
Oh,
Yeah.
there's so much there's already that momentum, and then you're not laying these on top of it. It's just what.
Yeah.
But yes, look, thank you so much for the time, taking the time out today to talk to us and share with us, to the world. So this is amazing. You have a wonderful rest of your day.
Yeah.
And
Thank you so much for having me, Tshaka, really, for doing this, for having me, and just for making sure that getting poetry out into the world in as many ways as you can. I appreciate you, brother.
as many ways as we can. As many ways as we can. All right, please hug your family, and you have a wonderful rest of your weekend.